Today we're going to go over some of our go-to shoulder-related exercises that we implement with a lot of our overhead athletes. And for us, the overhead athletes that we tend to see are going to be quarterbacks, pitchers, softball, and baseball players. And these exercises that you see, you've probably seen before if you're into training, performance, or just like the shoulder in general. But I think paying attention to the detail and really focusing on the small things can really make or break an exercise. And each exercise is going to be different for each athlete. A lot of times, exercise selection really depends on the athlete's posture, their range of motion at certain joints. But these exercises are going to be somewhat basic and broad in nature and can be beneficial to most every athlete, assuming there's nothing crazy going on, right? That's why assessment is so important. However, let's go ahead and dive into these exercises. So I kind of split these up into 4 different categories. The first category we're going to go through is our rotator cuff exercises. We're just going to have 2 or 3 rotator cuff exercises, so our lateral rotators. Our second kind of category is going to be our low trap exercises. Our third category is going to be our serratus anterior exercises, with our fourth category being kind of our stabilization exercise. So it's going to be kind of broad in nature, but I think a lot of these exercises done correctly and done right can help with one, shoulder health, and then just with optimal performance as well. So again, let's go ahead and dive into the actual video or the meat and potatoes and look at some of the exercises. But before we do, I just want to encourage y'all to consider subscribing to the channel if you like any performance or training related content. With that said, let's go ahead and start off with the rotator cuff exercises that we like to implement with our overhead athletes. So this exercise is something we call prone external rotation. So prone meaning face down, then external rotation referring to the shoulder joint right here. And so this is going to be a neuromuscular activation exercise. I'll go ahead and start from the beginning. And this is something that we want to get our rotator cuff firing before we do the actual strength work. So a lot of times we'll see people cranking their low back, but we just want the humerus, the bone right here, to rotate laterally, right, or to move the arm back, and that's what we call the glenoid fossa, and that makes the ball and socket joint. So again, we are trying to get the rotator cuff firing. That's why we want to create that neuromuscular activation. We come to the top, we hold for 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we usually do reps of 6 here, so we have 30 seconds of time under tension. So we know whenever we're doing an actual strength exercise that we are actually working on the lateral rotators that we want to target there. So again, it's called a prone external rotation. Again, you'll see elbows get below the shoulder here, so make sure the elbow is even with the shoulder, so the lat's not firing, and that you have some type of pad under your arm as well. So as we progress from that prone external rotation, we'll do a sideline external rotation. Again, like I mentioned early in the video, a lot of these movements are kind of basic, but I think having this attention to the detail and being obsessed with the correct way to do things can really go a long way. So we'll see we're going to put pressure into the blue pad here. The elbow is going to be even with the shoulder, not in front, not behind, and don't let the shoulder immediately rotate forward, right? And ideally, you would have weights in your hand, 1, 3, 5 pounds potentially. But this is kind of our basic next step as far as our rotator cuff exercises go. So again, I'm laying down. Oh, let's restart again. So I'm laying down on the table, have weights in my hand, usually like a 10 to 12 rep range, what we're after, with a 3-second tempo on the way down. You just want to feel it in the back of your shoulder where your lateral rotators are. You want to avoid any pinching the front part of your shoulder. Again, not letting the humerus glide forward or the shoulder joint itself roll forward. So again, we'll go about 3 sets of 12 here. Feel it in the back of your shoulder, our rotator cuff, holding a small weight here while putting pressure into the black pad here. So we'll have one more exercise that we'll go over as far as the rotator cuff exercise. But just to review, we had a prone external rotation. This was a side lying external rotation. And now we're going to have an elbow by side external rotation with a band. So this is what we call an elbow by side external rotation, right? So just meaning elbow by side, what it sounds like, and then you're externally rotating from the shoulder joint here. And so this is going to be just kind of our last basic rotator cuff strengthening exercise here. Want to make sure that the elbow stays in line with the shoulder, that it's not immediately rotated, right? The shoulder's not rotated inwards, and that the elbow doesn't go behind the shoulder either. If you good posture right here, shoulders as level as possible. A lot of overhead athletes, their dominant side will be depressed here, so we want to make sure we avoid getting them in that situation. So generally, we'll have them come out, we'll hold for 1/1000 count, then you control back in as well without letting the shoulder again rotate inward. So we'll go ahead and watch it just a few more times here. You can use a band, a cable, some type of a band or cable will work perfect for this. So again, we'll come out maybe reps of 12 or so with a good controlled pace back in. Again, this is an elbow by side external rotation movement for your lateral rotating muscles here. So here's our first exercise in our low trap series. And again, very basic and simple, but this is called a prone trap raise. So very similar like the prone ER. It's the same mindset. It's glitching, I'm sorry, but it's the same mindset as the prone ER. We're trying to create a neuromuscular activation to the muscle that we're trying to fire. So this being a low trap, the bottom of the scap, this posteriorly tilts the scap and helps create room for the humerus to move under the scap and move freely, right? And so it posteriorly tilts the scap back and keeps the scap on the rib cage when you're throwing, essentially. So a lot of times we'll see guys move from the low back here. We just want to kind of regionalize the movement to come from the low trap. So again, we're going to have, just like the prone ER, we're going to hold for 5 seconds at the top. You should feel it right through here. And then when you lower it, you want to keep tension on that low trap as well. You don't want the scap to wing off, right? Whenever the scap wings from the rib cage, there's space under there, so we don't want that to happen. I'll go back one more time and play it for you, let it go through. So we hold for 5 seconds, and then you'll control down here. Again, you don't want to feel anything in the anterior part of the shoulder. You're tilting the scaps back, low trap firing, doing the work here. This is called your prone trap raise, kind of our basic introduction to low trap work. But before we do some strengthening, we want to make sure that we're actually feeling the muscle work before we add any load to it. So here's what we call an incline trap raise. So kind of a progression from the prone trap raise we just saw, tilting the scaps back, making sure you don't feel anything in the anterior part of the shoulder, low trap being the bottom of the scap, doing the work here, and making sure we're not making this a deltoid dominant movement, right? I won't go over deltoid dominance in this video, but if the deltoid is dominant, it's kind of counteracting against the rotator cuff and the low trap too, essentially. So again, we're tilting the scaps back, making sure there's nothing pinching, no anterior discomfort here. And we usually do maybe 8 to 10 reps with like a controlled tempo on the way down. So again, we're holding slightly at the top, low trap being right here, making sure the low back isn't actually being a compensatory position or region, and that the low trap is actually the muscle doing all the work here. Again, that's why we do that prone trap raise, to get that neuromuscular activation. So again, this is an incline trap raise, anywhere between 3, 5, 8 pounds or so. You should be able to feel a pretty decent burn in the low trap. Anything heavier than that, maybe 10, 12, 15, you start feeling it in your deltoid, which again, we do not want to be the primary mover in this exercise. So here's a half kneeling landmine press, and this is probably our main vertical pressing movement for any overhead athletes. This is what is going to be working on what we call our serratus, whatever you want to call it, anterior muscle, and that's the muscle that upwardly rotates the scap here. So right here, our scap is upwardly rotating. Notice I'm kind of like shrugging, and so the muscle that's doing that, or at least assisting, is what's called our serratus anterior, which attaches kind of by the rib cage on the side of the body here. So that's helping create space under the scap here, as opposed to if we're just punching from the deltoid, the scap's not moving, there's not a lot of space for the humerus to move under the scap there. So again, this is called a half kneeling landmine press. We have variations where you can stand up, but for the sake of the video, I'll just show this one here. You want to make sure the core is locked in, not rotating here in your glove hand or your lead hand if you're a quarterback, staying there. Again, 8 to 10 reps to start off, controlled tempo, and then you want to make sure the wrist is neutral, right, and the elbow does not go lower than the shoulder to avoid any anterior humeral glide or just excessive anterior extension, humeral extension in the shoulder. So again, half kneeling landmine press, one of our favorites for vertical pressing and for our serratus anterior. So here's a yoga push-up, and like most of these exercises, can be put anywhere in a well thought out program structured for an overhead athlete. We're going to see this is going to have some serratus focus as well, right? We want the scaps to be upwardly rotated, which is what we're doing right. Let's see. Boom, there, right? So we're upwardly rotating the scaps, creating room for the humerus to move under the scaps, right? And then this probably isn't the best example, so I apologize. This is me. I'll take blame for it. But you want some kind of thoracic extension going on here and using it almost as a lat mobility movement exercise as well. So again, yoga push-up. Some people, what we'll do with a lot of our athletes is we'll put weight on their back here during the regular push-up, so they're still getting a strength component here. And once they come up, we'll take the weight off, and then they'll do their yoga part. Then we'll put the weight back on. They do the rep and so forth. Again, it just depends on what the point of the program is, what the point of the exercise is. But again, serratus work here, upwardly rotate the scap here, push the ground away. You feel a stretch in your lats, your serratus working, and then some thoracic extension work as well, even though that was not a great example on my part. But again, a yoga push-up, serratus work. So this exercise right here we're about to watch is a basic stabilization exercise. We'll go ahead and kind of watch a few seconds of it. And we do this usually towards the end of our arm circuits after we've done some rotator cuff work, low trap work, some serratus work. And this kind of just helps with the overall timing of things, making sure the muscles are firing when they're supposed to be firing. So right here, he's getting that end range of motion. We'll watch it one more time. His scaps are flying off the rib cage, right? So he's kind of getting strong and stable at ball release, trying to limit any movement through here. Now, of course, there's going to be some movement as the partner or your trainer is kind of giving you some stabilizations throughout the arm here, but you're working on some rhythmic timing here, keeping your rotator cuff firing the entire time and trying to stay as stable as possible with some external stress and external force. Again, we like this exercise and kind of usually end with some type of stabilization exercise. So as we stated at the beginning of the video, exercise selection is going to be heavily dependent on how a certain athlete assesses how their shoulder moves, what's their external, internal rotation, how much upper rotation they have on their scap. And we kind of get that from our assessment and from seeing how they sit posturally and what their range of motion at each joint is. But again, these exercises can be used pretty universally across the board and can be pretty can be pretty beneficial for most overhead athletes in general. So give it a try. Let me know in the comments below if you liked it. If you have any questions, let us know. And again, if you like this type of content, just consider subscribing, and we'll see you next time on our next video.